students enrolled at universities and technical schools such as MIT. The term hacker is used negatively sometimes to describe some of the students working in the field of computer programming. Dr. Stephen Shorover is a professor of psychology at MIT and has conducted studies in the field of psychotechnology.
Hacker is a slang term, and it hence is open to a number of different interpretations. Hacker is, to some extent, a pejorative term. It describes a person whose sort of principal involvement, often to the point of some degree of compulsion, is with the process of programming, computer programming. I think that in its more pejorative term, there are certain signs of a kind of addictive quality to the process of interacting with a computer. So large numbers of people become involved up to the point of spending 12, 15, 18 hours a day working on computer programs. The person who is sort of compulsively connected to activity on computers, the compulsive programmer, is a hacker. In a looser sense, a hacker could be anybody who has a certain facility and derives a certain amount of enjoyment out of interacting with computers, so that the usage is really very broad. And the question is, what sort of people are we producing if a large proportion of people who we say we are training for future occupations and future leadership in the society experience an interaction with the computer as much or all of what is their reality? That is, if their reality is interacting with the computer, whether the person is a hacker or a compulsive programmer or not, I think we have to ask questions about whether these are, in fact, whether this is healthy for the individual, or in the broader sense, whether it is healthy for our society.
Sociologist and psychologist Dr. Sherry Turkle is an associate professor in MIT's program in Science, Technology, and Society. She is the celebrated author of the book, The Second Self, Computers and the Human Spirit.
What I worry about when I see people who are intensely involved with computers, whether they be hackers or whether they be kids who are taking their first programming course, what I worry about is whether other things in the person's life are dropping out, whether the computer is becoming a substitute for kinds of human interactions that I believe are a good thing. Because you see, the computer can offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. In its reactivity and interactivity, it gives the illusion, as one hacker said to me, that there's somebody home, that there's somebody there, even though you aren't threatened by the demands of a real intimacy, of a real friendship. And in our culture, a lot of people suffer from being lonely and yet being afraid of intimacy. And if you think about it, the computer offers a seeming solution to the problem of being lonely yet afraid of intimacy, which is that it offers the illusion of companionship without the dangers of intimacy. And that's very seductive, and that's not all good.
And the problem that I see, again, is one of balance. Again, not to criticize the computer as an object or as a machine or as a medium, but to say that the concern has to be with balancing that mode of reality with the mode of reality that involves human social interaction in the world that is so deeply suffused with human values, the one that we live in.
One of the important ways that the computer changes the way people think about themselves is a little bit surprising. I found that when children used to define what was special about being a person in opposition to their nearest neighbors, which they used to see as the animals, their pet dogs and cats. So there were the animals, and then there were the people, and people were special because they thought. In other words, for the child, the Aristotelian definition of man as a rational animal made sense because they were defining people in opposition to the nearest neighbors, the pet dogs and cats. Now the computer is the nearest neighbor, and people are special because they feel. In other words, the child says the computer thinks, people feel. As one kid said to me, when there are the robots, people will have the families, cook the food, love each other, and I guess they'll be the only ones who'll go to church. In other words, people are special because of the basic values, the romantic values.
The Reverend Scott Paradise is the Episcopal chaplain at MIT. He is the convener of a yearly series of technology and culture seminars at the Institute.
It's a curious thing that the Episcopal chaplains should be the organizers of this program having to do with the impact of technology on society. But we start with the premise that God is the Lord of all life, and that he's concerned with what happens to human beings here, both their bodies and their souls, and that the way technology develops creates an environment which can enhance human growth or stunt it, or shape it in certain ways rather than other ways. And so, by understanding the development of technology, we can understand better how the environment can make possible or enhance the Christian mission. And so we have had a whole series of issues through the years which have been addressed by the seminar. Sometimes it takes the form of small, regularly meeting groups, but more often it takes the form of lecture series, which are open to the public and are attended both by faculty and students here. And the issues are often secular. Some might say, I see nothing religious about this. And yet, these are the concerns of God, because they have an impact on people and determine what we are going to be like and what our future might be. The current program that we're engaged in is one on computers and society.
Now, what you have to understand is that 90% of all the supercomputers that have ever been built, and definition is simply the fastest and biggest thing running at a given moment. It's a moving definition. There's no technical definition. But whatever is considered a supercomputer at the time, at least 90% of them have gone to either Lawrence Livermore Lab or Los Alamos or the National Security Agency, and maybe one or two other governmental agencies of a similar vein. And all the talk about weather prediction is nonsense as far as the motivation for getting us to where we are in supercomputers. I question the efficiency. And I will ask rhetorically, might it not be nice to live in a society and to work in a field where the primary pressure for innovation came from someplace besides the military?
Now, to compare military systems with civilian systems is, I think, not quite fair. I mean, can you take the same amount of money and do something good with it? I don't think so. There's no question that many good things for civilians have come out of research on behalf of military. What sort of airplane do you think you'd be flying between here and Florida or any place else? I just came up from Florida, which is why I used it. If it hadn't been for military uses, I think something a little better than the Ford Tri-Motor, if you know what that is, but not a hell of a lot. Maybe a DC-3, which was a very good airplane, but takes a while and held only 23 passengers. There are many other things, computers certainly.
I'd say there's a wonderful minority of students here who have an intense social concern and consciousness. And I sometimes feel almost in awe of some of these kids and the dimension of their social concern. But the same goes for the faculty. You have many faculty here, and some of them have very little social consciousness. They're totally dedicated to their science or their engineering and this particular specialty, and they go far. But others have a much broader, deeper concern about the moral and ethical and human values in the technology they're developing. Well, of course, we'd like both to reinforce those that are already concerned and introduce those without it to social concern and win them to that cause. But by and large, those without any social concern probably don't participate. We've assumed for many years, many decades, I guess, that the advance in technology is likely to be good. And any advance in technology is to be encouraged. And there are no forbidden fields of knowledge. However, I think more we're getting to realize these days that technology, a particular technology, isn't necessarily going to improve the human condition. And we need to force ourselves to find ways to discriminate between technology which is going to improve the human condition and that which is either going to be destructive or maybe neutral.
People are much more involved in discussions of the technical details of, say, computer systems in education, and much less concerned than I believe they ought to be with questions about who needs it, why should we have it, what ends is it going to serve.
People do worry about the fact that computers will cut down human communication and interaction, and there is some truth in that, but it's ambivalent. It works both ways. For instance, if you take the computer in the classroom, the child is interacting with a machine, and therefore, during the time that he is working at a computer, he is being cut off from his fellow students and from his teacher. And he is therefore interacting with an object that is an inanimate object. But if you consider the fact that that then frees up the teacher to work individually with another student, you can see the computer as liberating people to interact in a more humane way. By providing or doing certain educational tasks with an individual student, the computer then frees up the teacher to interact with the student in a more personal way. So it works both ways. And I asked my 17-year-old son, who's a sophomore in high school, what he thought the most obvious impact of computers was on the educational system in the school that he attends. And he immediately said that there were a number of computer buffs in the school that spent all of their time in front of the machine, that you couldn't get them to do anything else. And he was, in effect, expressing the concern that interaction with the computer cuts down our interaction with other human beings. And I think that's true, but we mustn't overreact. What we must be absolutely sure that we understand is that education is primarily a process that takes place within community. Learning is a community experience.
Well, there are many people who are afraid that computers will cause children to be less sociable, that'll cause them to be more introverted, more involved with machines and not with each other. Our observations in classrooms is exactly the opposite. When children are around a computer, they tend to talk to each other about the learning that's going on, which is the kind of talking you want in the school. They're very sociable. They share solutions or attempts at solutions of what's on the computer. So our observation is that in the schools, anyhow, it's a device that seems to help socialization. What do the critics say? Well, the critics say everything from a very Luddite position, which is that computers will destroy the human soul, which is a fairly extreme statement, to they think it's mechanistic, to they think that it's going to control access, to making people much too machine-minded and not humanistic-minded. I think that's... Some people think it trivializes information. That's another point of view that some people would make. And every movement has its critics, and they should be there. I think if the critics weren't there, it'd be terrible. I don't think that those accusations are... I don't think that the accusations really hit at what the technology can do. the technology, by which I mean essentially the computer for the moment, is an enormous tool that's mind-enhancing. It can give power to the user, it gives power to people to control information, to have access to information, to make decisions about their own life, which I think is an empowering act. That isn't to say there aren't troubling things about it. Of course there are troubling things. One of the troubling things is who's going to deliver the information, over what kind of a carrier, to what extent will that control or change the quality of that information. These are troubling matters, of course they are. But the technology itself is an empowering tool when it's used, I think, at its best. And I think the critics don't see that. I don't think they see what it can do for people. The access alone is revolutionary. Just as the printing press is revolutionary, this is twice as revolutionary, I think.
The fear of technology doesn't come out of ignorance. Well, sometimes it comes out of that, I think that technology that people are offered ought to be feared. I fear it myself. I think we should make a technology that's more human and more friendly and more warm and less fearsome. I don't think we should be worrying about how to get people to like a technology that's essentially unlikable. Technology is not neutral, that's for sure. I think we see it in the educational setting in many ways. I'll pick two. One is the idea that it's culturally neutral, as opposed to teachers who are culturally biased. I think, on the contrary, that the technology that's now being pumped into the schools is the product of a particular culture. A very male, white, sort of Californian mixed in with a bit of New England culture. It's a minority. And I think that the kids in the school who are closest to that culture, on the whole, like it best because it's like what they are like. And so they're favored by it. Well, I think the others are partly disfavored because they don't like it and don't get involved and don't learn from it. They also partly, is disfavored the right word? They're disfavored because it deforms their own culture, forcing them into the culture of a different minority. So I think that it's not neutral, and we should make the technologies flexible enough so that every cultural group or tendency can express itself through the technology.
Until very recently, the computer culture has been made primarily by men for men and by engineers for engineers. The culture was developed as an engineering culture, and it was a predominantly male culture. That has had implications for the feeling, the texture, what it's like to work with computer systems. This is changing now, and it's very important that change now, because it's important that we make a computer culture for all of us. I like to say that the question now is not whether or not the computer is good or bad, but how to make it good for us, for all of us, including women, including minorities, including those of us who have been traditionally left out of the computer culture, because it's no longer going to be an isolated, separate culture. It really is going to permeate the society as a whole. And I feel that being left out of the computer culture at this point is really to be disenfranchised in the world of the 1980s and the world of the 1990s. So that the humanist who says, oh, I think computers are bad, I think I don't want to dirty my hands with this, I'm pulling out of the scene, it's really an abdication of responsibility for making the computer culture. It's not whether the machines are good or bad. They're neutral. The point is to make them good for us.
We don't need to develop new values. We just need to make the connection between the application of technology and the value system which we already have. I think the church has a very important role to play. It must sensitize the society to the potential consequences of technology, make the general public aware that it needs to be involved in the decision-making process through the legislative arms of our government and influencing politicians, to see to it that technology is applied towards the fulfillment of human nature rather than its destruction.
Dividing by two at some point in time, you get 1/2. What's it do?
Go up.
Still going up.
so no, it's just a tiny
But
bit.
let's see how far.
No, it isn't.
No, it isn't. Do you think it's going up?
Is it? Now it's staying. Look. No.
Yeah.
It's just hovering, really hovering. Look.
Now, up or down? You say it might even go down. You
I
think
say it
it'll
goes
go
up.
up less.
I go up. I say it goes up slower.
Okay. Up.
102. It only went up. It went up to sea. It went up.
You did it with the
Did you go to camp with Amanda the Panda?
Yes.
Tell me about it. What was fun about it?
The dance and swimming.
Thanks to you and 13 local radio stations for making this year's Amanda the Panda Radiothon a big success.
You know, those kids, they deserve something like this. They're wonderful young people.